OneLitPodcast may contain adult language or sensitive subject matter. Please take care while listening.
Hello, everyone. It's Andria,
Hayden,
and Olivia,
and welcome to OneLitPodcast.
Woo!
We are back to discuss chapters 26 to the end of Abigail Rose-Marie's The Moonflowers. I don't know. Wrong book.
It's finally over.
The Moonflowers. But before we get into it, how's everybody doing?
Doing good.
Good.
What are you drinking today?
I am drinking this blackberry wine from Stonebrook Winery. It's a winery up in Camp Springs, Kentucky.
Really good. And me and Hayden are just taking a break this week. We were really tired, so we got just some good old caffeine.
Mm-hmm.
Pepsi.
Pepsi.
And she's crispy.
That's good too.
From the land of Fazoli. Okay, so are we ready?
Yeah.
All right. So grab yourself a drink, snuggle up in a cozy corner, and get ready to get lit. Okay, so of course, brief trigger warning. While we're not going to get too much into it this episode, it will mention rape, abortion, sexual assault, domestic violence.
Mm-hmm.
If you cannot handle any of these, we totally understand. You can turn off this episode.
Go to next week with our new book, which we'll talk about later.
Yeah. Okay. So, we left off. Tig visits Eloise one last time to get to the end of our tale. But before she stops by, she goes to Rita and shows her Valerie's journal. And Rita now knows it's confirmed that Valerie was with Benjamin when he went to Whitmore Hall that night to confront Eloise. But Rita does say Valerie came by one night after his funeral to tell Rita she was leaving and not to come looking for her. She also tells Tig that at first Ben's death was ruled as a suicide from hypothermia and death by the bottle. Of course, Tig had no knowledge of that. She thought Eloise confessed right away, but Rita says no. She confessed right when Valerie went missing. So, Rita assumed for the longest time that in her grief, Valerie had actually just drowned herself in the river.
Mm-hmm.
And then we find out that Rita just changes the subject and says she never intended to go to a play in Chicago the night of the art show.
Mm-hmm.
So she was there because she received a letter from Valerie. And Valerie had told her everything about her son and her granddaughter, that she was an artist. And by the time Rita got the letter, Valerie had passed away from pneumonia. But inside was a newspaper clipping talking about Tig's art exhibition. So we find out Rita was the woman in the yellow jacket that visited Tig that night.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Yeah, we always suspected it was a relative. Just didn't know who.
So
I just thought it was like just a random lady.
Really?
Yeah.
Well, because...
But she knows these trees.
Yeah. I feel they were making it seem like
I thought she was
more.
from Darren.
Yeah.
But I didn't know who it was.
I was just like, oh, okay. I mean, it could have just been a random lady who was like from Kentucky or
Yeah, that's true.
something. I didn't look too much into it personally.
My initial thought was, okay, they're hinting at this person being close to her.
Yeah.
So we find out that Rita actually asked the mayor to write the letter. And she said to write it to Tig, knowing that she's an artist, and knowing that he was about to commission someone to do a portrait of Benjamin. But once he found out about Tig's dad, he thought it would be even better to have the son of Benjamin do the portrait.
And he's a professor.
And he's a professor. And then Rita says she has an agreement with the town saying she will basically not say anything negative about Benjamin as long as they leave her and her family alone. But Tig asks how she feels about Eloise. And she says, Eloise saved her life. And we find out that she had gotten pregnant with an associate of her father's.
Yeah.
That summer.
That threw me off because I think last time, whenever we were talking about it, I think
you were like, it's consensual.
I think I said that. I was like, oh, like it was probably consensual, but I retract that statement.
It doesn't seem to be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So.
Well, I mean, they never said anything back then. But.
Right. So. Rita says she doesn't know if she could do what Valerie done, which is leave Darren. And she, there's just so much she still doesn't know about her. And Tig agrees to tell her everything she knows. So they just sit, drink cola, and she tells her about her grandmother. And Tig leaves Rita's knowing she's now ready to hear the end of the story. So we pick up, Eloise tells us Ruth's baby is born, but Ruth will not touch it, doesn't want anything to do with the baby. But Eloise took to him quickly. So this is kind of like reminiscent of her mom, Joan. It doesn't seem like Ruth wants anything to do with the child, just kind of is numb to the idea of being a mother after her traumatic event.
Which I was really surprised that Ruth actually went through, like, with this birth.
Right,
and
yeah.
everything.
It is said that Ruth always wanted to be a mother.
Yes.
Yeah.
So we find out later that's why she didn't. I guess she was hoping that maybe that connection would come.
Yeah.
But knowing it was her rapist baby, I don't think she could ever get over that.
Yeah.
So weeks later, Eloise finds Ruth out on the widow walk, which reminds Eloise of Joan and how the weeks just passed, and Ruth seems like a ghost and doesn't want anything to do with her kid. And she also says some nights when she was out walking, Eloise was out walking, she would see Valerie collecting weeds by the tracks. And she knew it to be hemlock. And Eloise tells her how deadly these are, but Valerie keeps picking. And she said, just one bite could kill a cow. And the quote here says, Valerie looked amused, and Eloise had the unsettling feeling that Valerie was pleased, that she was delighted to know that the white flower she held in her hands could kill her in an hour's time.
And then did nothing about it. Just let her keep doing it.
Yeah, she does. She's just like, yeah. She says, don't say I didn't warn you.
I'm worried about your mental health. I'll let you just keep picking these poisonous plants.
All right, bye.
Okay, and then we arrive on the fateful day of March 27th. Ben and Valerie are standing on her step. Ben is looking cocky, and he's just very creepy. He's like, you haven't been very careful, Eloise. And he mentions the name Jenny Cox. So we find out Jenny Cox was just up there for a termination 3 days before. And Eloise thought Jenny would never dream of telling anyone about it. But Ben says, a person will tell someone almost anything when they're needing work. Benjamin said as if he were reading her thoughts, a couple of details for a job in Moorhead. He shrugged innocently.
Yeah, because it said, like, Jenny already had 4 kids.
And her husband was out of work.
Yeah, so it's just like you don't have any way to supply, like, their needs and everything, so.
So, Valerie says, Eloise. And Eloise just snaps back in and is like, okay, Valerie's here. And she's holding a pie.
Like, why are you even here?
Yeah. So she says, I'm never one to let a pie go to waste. So she brings them both in, and they sit down at the dining table. Eloise pours some wine, and she's trying to, play it off. So she's like, what did old Jenny Cox have to say? Trading lies for work. But Ben isn't falling for it. He doesn't go for the bait. And he yells at Valerie to cut him a slice of her pie. And Ben just goes on and he says, I know about all the women coming out of state coming here in the middle of the night. Ben takes a bite of his pie, and upstairs a door slams and a baby cries. Eloise tries to distract him, but he says, Jenny Cox did mention a baby being here. And he says, and I got to thinking that was rather odd because I don't remember seeing you pregnant, Eloise, and that aunt of yours is too old to be pushing out any babies.
Ugh.
So Eloise is freaking out internally. He's putting it together that, obviously that's his child with Ruth. And Eloise is just reeling and guessing what Ben is thinking. He's thinking he knows his baby is back. He could send Valerie away to an asylum and just say she's hysterical after losing their child. And he would take Ruth and the baby. And then Alma enters with the baby, not knowing there was company, to get the baby some milk. And Ben knows it's his son. So Valerie gets up, touches the baby's head, asks the name. They haven't named him yet because Ruth hasn't decided. Ben freaks out on Valerie for touching him, saying, she killed my first boy. Eloise could tell by looking at Valerie that Valerie has heard that accusation many times before. Eloise tells Ben to sit back down. Alma takes the baby upstairs. In the background, a kettle boils. Valerie offers to go get it, to make Ben some tea since it calms him down. Ben tells Eloise he will burn the place down if she tries to keep his son away from him. And she says that baby has nothing to do with him. And he says, I guess Ruth didn't tell you about that night. That it's always been Ruth, that he always loved her. Eloise tells him to go to hell. Goes to check on Valerie. She finds Valerie putting hemlock in his tea. And Eloise lets her serve it. So by the time Eloise enters the dining room, she sees Ben drinking greedily from the cup. He tells Eloise she has 2 weeks to stop the operation and get out. Eloise mentions to herself that in the drawer is a large envelope filled with $100 and an address written on a sheet of paper. Ben says he can't let the town believe he's letting her continue her practice. And then Ben's face gets red. He starts saying it's hot, he can't breathe, and he coughs so hard he falls onto the floor, and he starts convulsing. And she sends Valerie to get Alma, leaving her with Ben while he dies, asking if he remembers the day they found the oak rocket for the first time, and they played.
And internally, she's like, there is no antidote for hemlock.
Yep.
So
He's just gonna die.
He's gonna die.
Sorry.
Okay, so after she talks about the oak rocket with him, he dies. So Ben is dead.
Then they plant his body in the woods.
Yeah, so Eloise says her plan actually was to, clean up the scene, take the body into the woods to let the police believe it was hypothermia. This would work until they did an autopsy. And him being a mayor, she was sure there would be an autopsy done. And she knew then that she would go down and confess to killing Benjamin. So they lay Ben near the Oak Rocket. Police find him within 2 hours. And she goes to talk to Ruth to explain her plan. So Eloise doesn't want an investigation of the house since it could lead back to Ruth. Mm-hmm. She had told Ruth to go hide the equipment with Alma. Eloise tells Ruth Valerie needs to stay for the funeral, and once she leaves, then we'll get her to safety. Eloise will call the police. Ruth asks what she will tell them, and Eloise reveals, that she did it and she will do it for her. But basically, Ruth's begging her not to. Eloise tells her, she's far too important for her to get caught.
Because, she keeps thinking about, that woman in Chicago.
Right. The lady.
The protesters killed.
Yes.
So she's like, I can't let that happen to her.
Yeah.
So, and if there's an investigation at their house, then that probably would happen.
So Eloise tells Tig the next day she took Valerie to the train station with the baby in the back seat. And Tig asks Eloise why she brought him along. And she tells Tig the night before she found Ruth just staring at the child outside of his crib while he was crying. Mm-hmm. When Eloise came in to soothe him, Ruth admits she cannot even look at him. She hates herself for it, but she can't bring herself to care for him. Mm-hmm. And it's then Eloise realizes that motherhood will end up killing Ruth just as it had killed her mom, Joan. Mm-hmm. So Eloise hands Valerie an envelope with money and a moonflower so she can get to the safe house in Chicago. And Eloise asks Valerie to take the child. Ruth had told Eloise the night before, I always wanted a child, but he was never mine. Eloise starts to leave, but asks Val to give him a name, and she names him David. But Tig realizes that her father's biological mother was Ruth, and she knows this was a hard decision for Eloise. And Eloise looks very sad when she's telling her this, and Tig says, I can tell you all about my dad and how he's had such a good life and he's a professor. But Tig does ask Eloise why Ruth didn't choose to terminate. And Eloise says, that just wasn't her choice. And that quote, that's all we ever were really trying to do up in the hills, give women a choice. So Eloise took the blame to prevent anything happening to Ruth and the clinic. But once Benjamin died, people stopped caring about Whitmore Hall. Ruth stayed for a while, but ultimately she went back to Chicago and joined an underground organization to give women access to safe abortions. She reveals 7 months before Tig arrived, Eloise received a letter, and the letter was Ruth's obituary. Tig asked her why she didn't tell her sooner about Ruth, and Eloise says, well, you asked for a story. And Tig sees the name Gloria Galley as the one who sent the letter, and with it an address close to her school in Chicago. So Tig asks to keep the letter, and Eloise just kind of zones out and says, while looking around her leaf-covered room, Ruth would have loved this. She has always been my Autumn.
Yeah, I love how it's like, oh, so my biological grandmother actually lived in Chicago, really close to where I was going to school.
Yeah.
So
never stopped by.
That sucks.
Yeah.
Well, Ruth probably didn't know about them.
No, she probably didn't care to know.
Because, after Valerie left, she kind of just just gonna live in my own life. Which she probably never had another family.
Right.
No, it doesn't seem like it.
It doesn't seem like she would.
It doesn't seem like she, because it doesn't, in the obituary when she's listening, it doesn't say she married or she had kids.
That's true.
It's
like she dedicated her life to women's healthcare. Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is kind of sad because it's oh, I always wanted kids. It's like, okay, like, I guess you
Right.
could have had that, but I guess the trauma of your
Yeah.
rape kind of ruined that.
So it's then Eloise pulls out a cup with white weeds inside. Hemlock. It's then Tig realizes that week she came and her and Eloise were walking the grounds outside. But she was actually picking hemlock weeds. So Tig, Eloise says, man, they don't even know there's this very dangerous weed growing outside the gates. And Tig goes, why didn't you tell anyone about it? And she says, I knew it would come in handy one day. And Eloise starts putting the weeds in tea bags. So we find out that last year Eloise picked up an infection from the prison, and then the letter came about Ruth, and she had to wait for the hemlock to grow. Mm-hmm. But then Tig showed up. Tig realized Eloise was going to poison herself. And that's why Eloise had to tell her everything, because soon she would be dead. Eloise says, my life has been full of strange and beautiful people, and I think it's now time to sit under the red oaks and enjoy a cup of tea. And that's it for Eloise.
Doesn't say anything else. It just ends.
We don't come back to her at all.
So, next thing we know, Tig is back at May's, and she starts working on the painting. And she says it starts with the eyes of a woman. And then the next day, Tig calls her dad and says she's coming home and will tell him everything that's happened, everything she's discovered. And, he asks her, why do you think, so did you find out why she left? And Tig's like, I'm going to save all this and tell you this when I get home. But he admits that in grade school, he did I don't know how to pronounce it, punnet square, which, you do for the hereditary traits. Mm-hmm. And he was doing his mother and his father, and it was almost impossible for two blue-eyed parents to have a child with brown eyes.
It's like 100% impossible.
Yeah. He says like 99%.
Yeah.
Unlikely. When he asked his mother about it, but he could see the fear in her eyes, and he just knew.
Which he said that it was at that time that, like, I knew that, like, she wasn't my mom, and I was like, it could have easily have been your dad that wasn't your dad. So I was like, what makes you think that it was her that wasn't your mom?
Good point.
Like, it doesn't
Good
say.
The night before Tig leaves town, she goes to see the statue of her grandfather one last time. And we find out she's made tons of copies of the missing posters and newspaper clippings.
Paper mache.
Yeah, and she's decided to make a paper mache collage on the statue by sticking all the papers of all the women all over it, leaving only the bottom pedestal that says courage, bravery, and honor. The next morning, she meets Jason to take her to the train station. Says her goodbyes to May, but before they leave, she drops the painting off with the $500 on top at the mayor's office, with a note that reads, "You were right. This town is full of brave and courageous heroes." On their way out, they drive past the statue, and Jason's like, what the heck? And, he's like, they're just going to take it down. And Tig says, they can take it down, but I bet that people will remember it. And Jason says on the way to the train station, he's been thinking about what Tig said in the cornfield, thinking about his little girls and how they could grow up and face the same struggles. And he's very concerned about it. Yeah. But Tig tells Jason he's one of the good ones. And he then tells her she's actually early for her train, but Tig says no, there's one stop she needs to make. So she goes to Chicago, along with the ghosts of all the women taking the same route before her.
Ooh, I liked that.
That part was really good. I was going to quote it, but it's really long. But, all the women that had escaped their abusive relationships, their, intense situations, they took this exact same train route to Chicago for a better life.
She imagines the ghost of all of them riding the train with her, and it was just, I really liked
that was a neat part.
I think that was the highlight of this
section.
Yeah,
that was nicely done. So when she arrives to Chicago, she goes to the clinic mentioned in the obituary. Of course, when she gets there, there are protesters harassing her on the way in. She asks to see the lady that wrote the letter to the receptionist, and you find out she's a doctor there. The doctor meets with her, and they talk about Ruth and Eloise. Her name is Dr. Galley. Mm-hmm. Dr. Galley says Ruth believed all this success was due to Eloise. And says... she says, Eloise never came to the city, but her presence is everywhere. Take a look at those letters on your way out. Some of them are over 50 years old. Ruth kept them in a shoebox, and I carried them with her on the train. And I bet you'll recognize some of the names. Which Tig does mention there's a bunch of letters and shadow boxes on the wall on her way out. Which kind of annoys me because we don't even get to look at the letters.
Yeah. I wish she had
because she says you'll recognize some of the names. I was waiting for her to say, "Oh, look, it's a letter from so and so that we heard about."
Yeah,
but we don't get that. Sorry. So, she leaves, but when she leaves, she proclaims to herself, "One day when I go back to Kentucky, I will tell the people of Darren County about Dr. Galley and the clinic that Ruth started in the city. I will tell them about the letters framed on the wall and the woman who works behind the desk with flag painted nails. I'll tell them about the blue walls and the pictures of flowers that hang in the room. I'll tell them that the facility is clean, bright, and smells like vanilla. I'll tell them that it is a safe place. It is a place where you can get help. I will tell them all these things because it is important for them to know that there are so many strong and courageous women who are here to help them when they're afraid."
Yeah, I think that goes back to what we were talking about last episode, where places like that, like the Planned Parenthoods and everything, where it's you have the protesters outside who are don't do it and everything, thinking that everyone who goes in there is just going in for abortions and everything, where it's not. They're actually there to help you. Abortions are part of that, but that's not everything that people go there for. There was while Tig was standing in the lobby, there was a young girl that came in, and she can see she's visibly upset about the protesters and everything. So it's just I wonder what she's there for. Is it for an abortion? Is it for
even if you
or whatever,
if you weren't there for an abortion and you had all these people yelling at you, telling you you're going to hell, you're not going to feel good about yourself if you go in there.
Exactly.
So even if you're just there for your pap smear, you're not going to feel safe. So after that, before she heads home, she stops by the alley. She only walks through the part that's not tainted with the memories of her assault. And she just so happened bought some spray paint on her way to the clinic. And she decides to paint a large red oak tree in the alley while thinking of all the women in Darren. And that's it.
And it also seems, by the way she's talking at the end, she seems like she's actually starting to heal and everything, processing through everything that's happening. And she said something about mentioning maybe going back to school in the fall. I thought that was something that she kind of hinted at.
I don't remember.
At the end. I don't think I have a quote or anything, but there was just one little line that I was just is she?
Which, she says something so she only goes to that part of the alley with the elephant on the wall. She won't go see hey diddle diddle.
Yeah.
Because she says that part of the alley, she doesn't feel like it belongs to her anymore.
And we've seen her mention this purple elephant like multiple times throughout the story.
Yeah.
And I didn't really think about it until the end, but I was just like thinking, the phrase like an elephant never forgets and everything. I was just like, well, maybe just like how you like never forget a traumatic event in your life, like an elephant never forgets and stuff, but you can eventually learn to like deal with the hurt
I also
better.
I don't know, maybe this is the literary major nerd in me, but like every time I saw the elephant, I thought of Hills Like White Elephants.
Oh yeah,
because it's about abortion.
I actually completely forgot about that piece. Yeah,
so that's a sad piece, and it's about abortion. Because basically the woman, she wants to keep the baby, but her husband, I think.
Husband/person who got her pregnant.
Yeah, is like, no, you're going to have to terminate.
Yeah.
So yeah, you should read that short story.
I don't even remember who it's by. I can look it up really fast.
Why do I think Hemingway? I don't feel like that's correct. No, I think that is correct.
It is by Hemingway.
Ernest Hemingway. Yeah. So yeah, that's it. That's where we end. She paints the tree on the alley and she's like, peace out, Chicago. So closing thoughts.
I mean, I liked it overall. I do feel like the ending was it seemed just a little bit rough. Like we talked about, we never hear back about
that bothers me
Eloise.
so much. I was waiting for there to be like, and the next day I heard that Eloise passed away. Like something.
Like this murder of Ben was like such a big deal, and her being a murderer was such a big deal.
Like it's not heard of. Like the townspeople aren't like cheering in the streets.
Yeah. But no, he's just like, hey, I'm gonna kill myself. And then Tig's like, all right, bye. I'm leaving.
Yes. So yes, I feel like this part of the book was very rushed.
Yeah.
We got so much drawn out through the rest and trying to entice us along, and then it just kind of lost it here at the end.
Yeah.
And like I said, right here, I was like, okay, the next day.
Yeah.
It's like very short, and we're flipping through time very quickly.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one thing, and that is something that when we get into the review part we're about to get into, they said it's very disjointed. People didn't like how it flipped back and forth through time, and like we said earlier, in the other episodes, we're like, I'm gonna be flipping back through time a lot, in the present, past, and the and future, present, whatever. So yeah.
And and like, I know we're going to talk about this more, but like whenever she sets her painting down.
Oh yeah, we're going to talk about
in the
this.
mayor's office. He's like, he's not there yet. I would have liked to see like an FU from her and be like, I mean, I guess like the statue, like doing the statue was like part of that. So like he might see that whenever he gets back to town, but I would have liked a little thing like between them. It's just like, well, bro, you don't know anything or whatever.
Right.
But yeah, I think we can get into
we're going to get into that
picture.
I want to, without mentioning the picture, I want you to tell me what you thought of the book.
Well, when it first ended, I had a higher rating, but the more I think about it, which of course this book is not meant for me. This isn't something that I would have picked myself. For me, it's like a 2 out of 5, maybe 2.5 out of 5 for me. The ending was very rushed. It felt like a lot of parts I felt like she should have talked about more. It just ends, and then we don't ever hear about it again. And it felt like the whole beginning half of the book was all of this build up, and then it just completely runs through it. So for me, I didn't care for it as much. But like I said, I'm not the target audience.
Mm-hmm.
I found a cliche a little bit. For me, it almost feels like a made-for-TV, like Hallmark movie. Or maybe like a Lifetime movie. I could see it being something like that. With the drama and, you know,
I see
her
what you're
putting
saying.
the paper mache on the statue. Like, I could see that in a Lifetime movie.
Yeah. Yeah, I did like the, whenever, like, it's just like this tense moment between, like, Eloise, Ben, and Valerie, and he, like, Alma comes in with the baby, and Ben's like, that's my baby, I know that's my baby. Like, it was very, like,
That was intense.
like, very intense, and, like, I like that and everything. That would be awesome to see, like, in a movie.
Oh, yeah, for
Whatever.
sure.
So, yeah, I thought, like, it had really good, like, intense, like, moments at the end, but, yeah, like, at the very end, it kind of just, like, we're gonna run through everything really fast. Like,
Okay, so we mentioned the painting, and I'm going to preface this and say we are not roasting the painting itself.
If for any reason whoever made this, which we have your name here, sorry,
It's the author's wife.
it's not good. Sorry.
He did. So here's the thing.
I've seen your other work and it's better, but this is
we looked at your other work. It was better. But here's the thing. My criticism is not about the art itself. It's that we're told Tig is this really amazing artist, and she's hyping up this painting so much. And I was like expecting like an actual painting with like pictures of these women. Yeah. That, you know, she's like, she just wants to commemorate. But so at the end of the book, you know, it says if you want to see Tig's drawing, go to this link, and we did, and it's a pencil drawing.
It looks like a colored pencil, cartoony-ish drawing of these women.
And honestly, I mean, not to be critiquing the artist, because I can't draw. So you did a lot better than I could do.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah. So like,
we expected more.
Yeah, I feel like the book would have benefited by not showing us an actual painting, by describing the painting.
Yes.
Because Tig has done nothing but describe beautiful settings and her artwork. This whole book, I was just expecting, you know, I drew a picture, I painted these beautiful women who went through so much, and they were in front of Whitmore Hall or something, and it was beautiful. Yeah. I was just expecting more, I guess. But also about the artwork, I don't know who it is. So there's three women on the porch. I don't know. At first I thought, you know, there's a blonde one that I'm guessing is Valerie, because she's the only really blonde one mentioned in the book.
I think that one is Valerie, yeah.
And then there's a lady in the back wearing pants with dark hair. And then there's a girl in a dress with dark curly hair. So I'm thinking maybe the girl in the back is Eloise.
The girl on the right's Ruth.
And the girl on the right's Ruth. Or it could be Rita in the back. It doesn't say, and we don't get a description of the...
I'll say what I thought. Like, the picture, I thought the three women were Alma in the back, because in the beginning it did have a mention of Alma like wearing pants and everything, so I thought she was in the back. Eloise was the one standing up with the short hair in the dress, and then I thought Ruth was the one.
It can't be Ruth. Ruth has the dark hair and brown eyes.
But that's who I thought it was, okay? If you think about it, Ruth is her actual, like, biological grandmother. They were the three women, like, actually working up in Whitmore Halls. But, I mean, maybe it was Valerie, since I guess, like,
no.
Alma wasn't really...
Is that Valerie?
This is Valerie right here. Blue eyes, brown hair.
She has brown hair?
Yes.
Oh, she had blonde hair.
Nope, she has brown hair.
But she's blue eyes.
In the missing photo.
Oh.
Short brown hair, yeah.
Okay.
I don't know who
Well,
the
we still
blonde
don't
is.
know who it
There's
is.
then who's the blonde lady?
I don't know.
I'm pretty sure Eloise
See,
isn't
I just
blonde.
thought it was
Could be Dana
rude.
Fields. She's blonde.
But there's only 3 of them, so
I
it can't be
know.
all of the missing women. See,
I know.
yeah, and like I said, like what I thought her portrait was actually gonna be
Like a collage.
was a collage, which she ended up basically doing that on the statue, like a paper mache with all of the missing flyers.
Could have stopped there.
I thought she was gonna do a collage of all of the missing women.
Mm-hmm.
So it's
Like,
just,
but
it's also kind of funny is, this is not an artwork that Tig did, clearly.
yeah.
I mean, given the experience that we're told she has in the book, this isn't something done by Tig.
Like we said, it's still better than anything that either of us could do.
Right.
So
I think it's just they hyped it up though, so that we thought it was going to be this amazing piece, really powerful,
I know.
and it wasn't.
Yeah.
Sorry to criticize if you ever hear this.
Yeah, it just doesn't seem like something this lady that's gotten like an art scholarship had her own thing.
Had a
would do.
gallery.
She had
So
a gallery.
That's what kind of cracked me. It kind of made me laugh at the end because
I know.
it also makes me question the rest of her works in the book. Because like
I know.
the woman in the woods, I'm like, okay, is that just like a bunch of like stick figure trees and stick figure leaves?
I mentioned that to you too because we were talking about it the other day, and like the tree at the end, I was imagining like
you drew it as a kid.
like a tree that I would do with like the super huge trunk, and now I'm just like, oh crap, I actually need like a top to this. So
Yeah, and it's just kind of funny, that she's trying to do this big F you, mayor, and leaves this artwork on his doorstep with the $500 and is like, yeah, there are other courageous women out here. So I'm just imagining him rolling up and unveiling the art, and it's just this pencil drawing. Yeah, I just think, I understand you want to support your spouse, of
Yeah,
course.
yeah.
You're like, you can draw this painting for my book,
yeah,
but like, I feel like it could have done without.
yeah.
A description would have just been better.
A description would have been suffice.
Yeah.
Now, what about the reviews?
All right, so I said last week I was going to look at the Goodreads review. I'm going to read reviews anonymously
Yeah.
from these people.
What's the overall review on Goodreads?
It's really high.
Okay. So like 4.5 out of 5.
Yeah, I think it's like 4.5 out of 5.
Okay.
So I did a 5-star review, a 1-star, I think a 2 and a 3.
I stand by my 2.5 out of 5. Yeah. I didn't care for it as a whole.
So we're going to start with the 1-star, I believe. Let me find that here. 1-star, anonymous reviewer. This entire novel is trying to defend why women are brave and courageous, in quotation marks, by the way, for getting abortions, why all men are bad. A married woman gets pregnant with someone else's child, then the husband is mean and still the one in the wrong? It's disgusting and despicable. The book description needs updated. Not everyone wants to read about abortion. So, yes, okay, so...
He beat
the shit out of her. He burned her and threw her out in the snow.
Holy crap.
Just because she cheated on him doesn't give him the right to abuse her.
And he's in the wrong for beating her almost to death, burning her body.
No, he probably would have killed her.
No,
Oh my God.
So I disagree. Anonymous reviewer. Okay. Review number 2. Well written, but I just can't get on board with the glorification of abortion clinics. It hurts my heart to know how many children die every year because they're, quote, inconvenient. We'll have to agree to disagree on this issue.
To be fair, most of the women in this book that
was
went
not
to have
a
this
matter
done.
of convenience.
It was not a matter of convenience. Most of them weren't doing it because they wanted to.
We have a rape baby.
Yeah.
Most of them were from abuse, yeah.
Abusive relationships where she's like, I'm scared what my husband could do to my child.
Mm-hmm.
And then, yeah, some of it was convenient. Like, hey, I already have 4 kids and a husband, and I can't support another mouth to feed.
Yeah, she
Like,
was struggling financially.
Yeah, her husband was unable to work, so she was.
But I mean,
working.
I don't really think that's like an inconvenience. You're scared.
She did it because she's trying to make a better life for her kids and her family. She knows she can't do another child.
Yeah.
And it's just going to take away from food and stuff that will go towards her existing children.
Yeah, she's like, I know I can already barely support my family now.
Yeah.
If I have another child, that's even less food for my other children's, my husband. Like, it's like if I have to divvy up like another mouth to feed, like maybe more of her kids would like starve or something. I don't really think that's like an inconvenience.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, and then let's see.
You have a 5-star?
I do have
And
a
a
5-star.
3.
I think this was the 3. Let me get that one. And this is, I'll say this is it is a common complaint in all these reviews as I looked, that there is no trigger warning in the beginning of the book.
Yeah.
So people who have PTSD from domestic violence, abortion, I feel like that should be mentioned at the beginning of the book. I don't feel like it would, if the author's concern was that it was going to give anything away. I don't believe that, because the whole book is about women seeking help and abortions and medical help, getting away from abuse. Yeah. But anyway, whatever. Says, it was not mentioned in the description that the main topic of this book was pregnancy termination and domestic abuse. Probably worth mentioning for readers with PTSD, trauma issues, etc. I'm all for praising the women from our history and all they have done and sacrificed, but it could have been mentioned beforehand. Set in 2 eras, 40s and 90s. In the 90s, I was wondering why Tig was being threatened by the town's mayor and others to be kicked out of the town simply by visiting a patient in the local home.
Didn't make sense either. Yeah, I get it.
Granted, she was paid to be there, but that's really not a reason to think someone could make you leave town. I have other issues, but I don't want to get into it because of spoilers. There were too many questions not answered for me at the end of this book. I think it would have enjoyed the history lessons a little more if it was presented up front and less scatterbrained.
Yeah, okay. And this is kind of where I'm basing my review off of as well. Like, I have a lot of agreements with that reviewer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's definitely some merit to there.
I think we mentioned that last episode, maybe, or it's just like who is the mayor to like?
Yeah, you did.
I'm gonna kick you out of town.
You did say, he's not going to show up here and tell us not to drink wine.
Yeah, I said the mayor of Bowling Green isn't gonna come up to our house and be like, "You can't be doing what you're doing." It's just like
the other thing I mentioned as well is they talk about going up to that widow's walk and just watching for the men in the woods.
Mm-hmm.
That never happened, and nothing happened to make them think that these men
no
were just
men
going to come up from the woods. I didn't understand that.
I mean, it had allusions to like some of these men would like leave like threatening messages and like gifts on their porch or whatever.
Right, and
But
I know that. But
it never showed any like if any women were there. It never showed any of their husbands like coming to get them.
Yeah, why would they come
So,
up through the woods and just walk up the road to the front door?
Yeah, I think
So this is, I brought this up with Hayden. I said, they're trying to get the element of surprise on them, but he's got a point because they're men.
If they grouped together, they would just walk right up to the front door.
Yeah, they would walk up to the front door.
and just be like, you gotta shut it down. We know what you're doing up here.
But it's not like their house like didn't have like a driveway or whatever. Like Tig had to walk, like it was just like
It was
a
a hill.
path.
Yeah, there was a separate
Up a
path,
hill.
yeah. Which Charles mentions that as well.
Yeah. So it's like there's not like, I guess it's technically like it's a path like through the woods.
Yeah.
So like, but yeah, they don't have like a car or anything,
Mhm.
like drive up there or whatever. So I guess they're still like coming through the woods.
Mhm.
Quotation marks.
I
but
just
it's
thought it was a
like-
little silly.
Oh yeah.
So here's another review. I think this is the 5-star. They said, I couldn't help but check the 1-star and did not finish reviews when I finished. To those reviewers who found this book to be problematic, because of your opposing views, some things in life will make you uncomfortable, because they are telling you a truth you don't want to hear. This is a work of fiction that provided some very real-life examples of what women truly experienced 70 plus years ago, and even still today. I love this book, even though I don't agree with every choice made by the characters. It's important to read books that challenge your point of view, help you grow, and make you feel.
Yeah.
So that's what we said last episode. We had a long discussion
Yeah.
about your views on the book. So we've got very different reviews here. While most of them are relatively positive, and just pointing out standard criticism, like in a book, like it's scatterbrained or
Yeah.
all over the place. Like some people took the message in a different way.
Yeah.
But disagree with the lady that said the husband that beat his wife was not in the wrong.
Yeah. Like what the heck?
That one kind of threw me for a loop. I was like, okay.
Okay. Yeah. That's just crazy.
All right. So we are officially finished with the Moonflowers.
Yay.
And next week,
we will be reading What Dreams May Come by Richard Matheson.
if you have the paperback, we're reading up to page 104. Or if you're reading on an e-reader, up until the chapter Memory Still Haunts.
Yes.
Okay.
I'm excited.
Yeah.
Can you
Should
give
be
us like a little snippet of what it's about?
So I'm going to read the back of the book,
Yeah.
which it starts off with a love that transcends heaven and hell. What happens to us after we die? Chris Nielsen had no idea until an unexpected accident cut his life short, separating him from his beloved wife, Annie. Now Chris must discover the true nature of life after death. But even heaven is not complete without Annie, and when tragedy threatens to divide them forever, Chris risks his very soul to save Annie from an eternity of despair. Richard Matheson's powerful tale of life and love after death was the basis for the Oscar-winning film starring Robin Williams.
Oh,
Yes.
So it's a movie.
Yes.
It is a movie, and I have seen the
We've
movie.
Wait,
both seen
Robin
the-
Williams.
Yes. And Cuba Gooding Jr. is also in it.
That's
And
true.
a few other actors. Great movie. Fantastic movie. I've not read the book, though,
Yeah.
so that is what we will be reading.
Okay. That sounds good.
Yep. And then we can watch the movie after.
Oh,
'cause it's
yay.
fantastic.
All right.
I'll just kind of. Are we gonna add sultry music here?
Yeah,
too?
of course. No laughing.
Sultry music. No
All
laughing.
Cue the sultry music. Hello. Like I said last week, Andrea and I are doing our December of Desire. So we are reading some books together. Most of them are going to be Christmas themed since it's December, obviously. This week we have read The Duke Who Despised Christmas. And it is the first book in the Christmas Dukes series by Scarlett Scott.
Okay.
It was, so this one actually wasn't as spicy.
No. So this is going to be a nice little break from last week's book for Hayden, bless him.
This one was more of like a slow burn.
This is more romance.
Yes.
Which is fine. There's a little spice at the end, guys. Don't tune off. There's spice at the end.
Like, I liked it and everything overall.
It did give me Christmas vibes, so.
It did?
Yeah.
Okay.
Appreciating it. We're ready to begin?
Yes, we can.
Okay. We start off in 1883 in a village in England. We start off with a man.
Governor?
He's a duke.
He's a duke. His name is Quint.
Oh.
So Quint is in his manor, and all of a sudden, he smells an unusual smell that instantly pisses him off.
Smelly smell.
Because he doesn't like change. Mm-hmm. So he calls for his assistant, Dunreeve, who reveals they have hired a new housekeeper. Mm-hmm. Quint orders that she's fired. He goes to find the source of the scent. And he enters his drawing room to find it decorated for Christmas. And then we're in Jocelyn's point of view. And she's like, man, the Duke is hot.
That's how it starts?
Well,
in much better language.
So after he tells his servant, he's like, fire her. And then he's like, don't worry, I'll do it myself. And everything. So he like goes to meet her. And he's like, oh gosh, she's actually really pretty.
She's really pretty.
And everything.
But she's like, yeah, he's attractive. But he's also my boss. And he's very cranky. And he tells her that they don't decorate for Christmas at his house.
Being a real Scrooge.
He tells her she's fired. And he leaves. But then she's like, he can't fire me because his mom hired me.
Yeah.
The Duchess.
I love that.
So Quint leaves and he's gone for a horseback ride. He comes back and he finds Jocelyn has decorated even more and not packed her bags to leave. Mm-hmm. So he gets pissed off at her insolence and marches off to find her. And he's in his inner monologue, we find out he had a wife who died in a fire, and he failed to save her.
And their unborn child.
Does it say unborn child here?
I think she was pregnant.
It says it later.
I think it just said child.
Okay, maybe it did say child here.
We do find out she was pregnant at the time because, like she was off like in the nursery or trying to find a room
for a nursery.
Whenever the house caught on fire.
During Christmas?
Wait.
It was like 3 weeks before.
3 weeks before.
That's why I hate it, of course.
And then we're back to Jocelyn's point of view. He finds her in her room, and he says he doesn't need a housekeeper, but she begs to differ and lists all the things that's wrong with the house. It's like, oh, so you don't need help with the rats? And he's like,
the stairs were falling apart. There was a fountain that wasn't working.
Yeah, she made a fountain. She hired somebody to make the fountain work.
Yeah. It's like everything in the greenery is like dead and dying.
Yeah.
So he's like, all right, you can stay.
She's really turning it around.
Yeah. He's like, you can stay like until like you get my house back in order and then you're gone.
Yeah. So after she tells him what's wrong with the manor, he asks why she deemed decorating for Christmas so important then, if all this stuff is wrong with my house. And she says it was the Duchess that asked her to. And she is coming for Yuletide.
Mm-hmm. And he's like, I didn't invite my mom to come.
Yeah. It's like, my mom is not welcome here.
Yeah.
So we find out she hired a new footman on her own because Dunreeve is overworked and he does everything for him.
Yeah.
And he's like, who gave you the power to do that? But anyway, he says he wants her gone the next day. And then we're back at Quint's point of view. Quint is being shaved by Dunreeve, and he is just thinking of how attractive Jocelyn is. And he thinks about their little dispute and their back and forth. And he's like, ooh, I like that.
One of my notes is, he's mad at Jocelyn for intruding upon his misery and for making him want her the minute he saw her.
So we find out he is horribly burned from the accident. But even so, thinking of her, he's reminded of his urges. And he dislikes that she's done this to him.
Yeah, he wears like gloves all the time to hide his scarred hands.
So Quint asks Dunreeve if he's overworked, and he says no. But Quint knows. Asks if everything Jocelyn mentioned was true, and he confirms, yeah, it is. So he asks Dunreeve to have Miss York, this is Jocelyn, brought to his study to set down some rules.
Naughty rules?
Jocelyn's point of view. In the study, he agrees she is useful and says that she could stay to fix the manor, but once done, she's gone. And she says, okay, pleasing you is my sole desire. Not meaning to make it sound so carnal. The air shifted, and the Duke's gaze falls on her mouth.
Ooh.
And he says, it is. And walks toward her. She says, it is. And he says, if that's so, he whispers in her ear, remove the Christmas decorations. And she says once again, it was his mom that asked her to decorate for Christmas. And he says, if you want to stay, you'll do it. Take them down. And I wrote, sexual tension. She says she'll get on it right away, but then the mouse traps will have to wait. And knowing he hates mice, he says, okay, get the mice out first and do the decorations later.
She also talks about, like, Dunreeve earlier had, like, cut him while shaving.
Oh, yeah.
And she sees the shaving injury, and she's concerned, but then she's like, oh, I'm ashamed of thinking of him in such an intimate manner.
So now Quint, or in Quint's point of view, he finds the scent of Christmas greenery is now pleasant to him. And he's also beginning to like his housekeeper. He's walking in the house, and he sees 4 footmen enter the library. And he opens the door and finds them with more decor.
It's like, oh God, there's even more here than yesterday.
So far, this feels like almost like a Disney movie.
It's giving Beauty and the Beast Enchanted Christmas.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
The whole cover is Beauty and the Beast Enchanted Christmas.
I know, that's what I thought of.
My initial thinking of how this is going to end is they're going to get married.
Okay, well, we'll see. So he sees her, Jocelyn, with her hair tied up, and he longs to run his hand through her black hair. He asks the help to leave, and they're left alone. He wants her, but he doesn't know if she's married, and she's a housekeeper, because apparently all housekeepers go by Mrs.
Yeah.
So he's like assuming she's married. He says, you must have no desire to stay because you keep doing what I tell you not to do. But she says, maybe I'm hoping to change your mind. And he's getting hot.
Mm-hmm.
She asked why he's against Christmas. And he doesn't say this to her. He thinks it. He says, Amelia died 3 weeks before Christmas. And he says, you have no right to ask. And she says, she just seeks to understand. And he says, it's not your job to understand me. but they have gotten closer to each other. And he says, your job, like, pleasing me is your job. And he's down bad. Thinking about taking her right then.
Down bad. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. I stole that from you from last episode.
Down bad.
Down bad.
She's feeling it too.
Yeah.
And asks him how.
How what?
Like how to please him. He shakes it off and says, by doing your job and taking the decorations down.
Man, she is just throwing them opportunities at you.
Right.
He says, you lied about the mice. And he asks if thievery is next. And she doesn't like this accusation. She's like, I've never stolen anything. And that she's merely doing what his mom asked of her. He gets frustrated, saying he's told her he's the owner of the manor, not his mother. The manor is called Blackwell Abbey, by the way.
Also, the reason she's so insistent upon staying and having the Christmas stuff up is because his mom, who is the Dowager Duchess, she's like, hey, I'm going to give you like £100
Yeah,
per...
she's getting paid a shit ton of money.
She's like, I'll give you £100 per, I think it's like annum, which I don't know what that is because
Yearly?
I'm not English or anything.
Yearly, I guess.
To work there. And then she's like, plus I'll give you an extra £50 per annum if you can keep all of the Christmas stuff up like until I get there. So that's why she's like so insistent on keeping all the Christmas stuff up, because she's like, I need this money.
Yeah.
We learn that Jocelyn is actually, she's the only one providing for her siblings.
So that's the
and
next
her mom.
chapter.
Yeah, when her dad died and everything.
Annum means yearly.
Yeah, like annually.
Yearly.
So back to that, he says he ought to fire her for lying, and she begs him not to, and he says, then obey me. And then we're in Jocelyn's point of view. She's conflicted about her feelings for the Duke. She says she had to put her own life on hold to help her family. But at one point, she had gone with her aunt for a season to London for much of her childhood, until she was to debut into society. But before she could debut, she was sent back home to find her invalid father and mother with a lot more children than when she left. So they were destitute, and she had to enter the workforce. But in walks the Duke, who's waiting for her. He heard her talking to herself and asks if she makes a good conversation. And she says she's usually the only one she can have a conversation with in her job. We find out she's 5 and 20. Mm-hmm. She's 25.
Oh, and he's like in her private rooms. So I'm just like,
yeah, he's in her quarters.
So she's 25. How old is he?
We learn later
He's
that
35.
he's 35.
Oh, okay.
And he acts like he's a super duper old man. He asks her if she's always been in service because she's so well spoken. And then she tells him about her studies in London. And he asks her if her aunts and cousins abandoned her to a life of service. And he's very sad about it. He hates thinking about her having to work so hard. Mm-hmm. And she tells him she does this for her family. He's curious how she got started and she starts asking, is this an interview? He's like, I guess it is. And he compliments her skills. He asks if she will stay on. And she says, what about the decor? And he says, if it'll keep you here, they can stay up.
Aww.
Before he leaves, he asks if she's married or widowed. She's not. Then Quint, I guess like the next day or something, Quint sees that Jocelyn has added flowers to the room and wants to say she did well and goes in search of her in the gardens. And she's making more Christmas wreaths. And it's really cold outside. And he offers her his coat.
It also says he's been feeling happier every passing day.
Oh.
And I don't know if that's like the same spot where you are, but he sneaks around the manor hoping he'll catch her talking to herself, which is a habit that he finds so cute.
He wonders what she'd look like in just his shirt.
Yeah.
Oh, his long nightgown? His nightshirt?
We don't know if it's long.
I couldn't imagine it being short.
We find out Amelia was pregnant, which we might have already known that. That her and their baby, she was pregnant, died in the fire. He is scarred from a fiery beam that fell on him, which burned his arms, chest, and stomach, and hands. She finishes the wreath and asks how it looks, and he says, beautiful, but he was looking at her. And then she's holding it, and he's like, don't you feel, he's like, I'll take that from you, and he takes it, and he gets stuck by a barb, and he's like, how are you holding on to it like this? And he's like, don't you feel it? And she says, no, because my hands are calloused and burned from all my work as a scullery maid.
And he's like, just how my hands are scarred and burned.
He feels the urge to hold her hands. But they take the wreath to the door and stand next to each other as she fixes the bow. And she says, isn't it perfect? And he says, it is. But he's not talking about the wreath.
Oh, still looking at her.
Still looking at her. So Jocelyn, this is, I guess, the next day, I don't know. She's cleaning her room for the Duchess. And she's like, oh yeah, another woman lived in this room. It was his wife. So she's like, I really don't want to do this and bring up painful feelings, but she goes to find him and asks what to do with her belongings. And when she tells him, he's like so happy to see her, and then he's like, oh crap. He's mad. It's been opened, and he goes straight to the room. Mm-hmm. And Jocelyn's thinking about all the servants upstairs, so she like chases after him. But she takes the servant stairs and beats him there and kicks out all the rest of the staff and takes like the blame for everything. Mm-hmm. And he wishes to be left alone in the room. And apparently he sits for hours and he feels guilty for liking the housekeeper. Jocelyn comes back in thinking he's left because it's been hours, but he has her come in and directs her what to do with his deceased wife's things. Mm-hmm. And she notices his gloves are off, and she sees the burns on his hands. So Jocelyn personally takes care to wrap his wife's belongings. She wonders if her and the Duke have a bond, since he didn't bother covering his hands when she came in. Mm-hmm. And she finds herself getting jealous of his dead wife. She passes by his study, and he calls out to her. He invites her in. He's been drinking and wants her company. He brings her a drink. He tells her in the library she can put aside the role of housekeeper and just be herself. And this is where he finds out her name for the first time, because he's been calling her Mrs. York. He asks if she wants to know about his scars. You want to know how I got these scars? He tells her and says he feels guilty for it. She says his wife wouldn't want him to feel guilty because she loved him.
Yeah, she like takes his scarred hands and it's like no, you did everything you could to like save them and everything. So he's like, she understands me.
He says Jocelyn is too kind and he doesn't deserve it. He tells her he's been a beast and her an angel, and takes her hands and gives them a kiss. But then he starts kissing up to her wrist. Oh, the wrist.
So sensual.
She thinks about
going further,
but she notices his eyes and drunken expression.
So she flees the room.
Yeah, she just leaves.
She's like, he's just doing it because he's drunk.
Do this.
I don't want to, like, push him because I think he's just drunk.
Right. So, Quint, the next day, he's, like, pacing back and forth in his study. He feels he made a mistake after seeing her expression and leaving.
And literally running out of the room.
He is conflicted about his feelings for Jocelyn. And he says There was guilt over desiring another woman, and one who was forbidden to him at that. There was shame over having made overtures when he did not know if they were welcomed. There was the anguish of his past colliding with the undeniable force of his future. God, there was so much, so bloody much, and it threatened to consume him. He wanted Jocelyn. He could not have her. Everything that had been hateful to him was now somehow comforting and desirable. A woman's touch, his skin on hers, the revelation of his scars, the Christmas greenery, a Yuletide season unmarred by loss and pain. So he has invited Jocelyn back to his study to apologize. She walks in, he apologizes, and she says, it's okay, you were drunk, lonely, and grieving. And he says, I am lonely. But it wasn't the grief and the brandy that moved me. It was you.
Uh-huh.
And he promises that he won't make any more advances. And you don't have to worry that your position is secure. He says, I'll not force myself upon you again.
And she's like,
shook.
That isn't why I fled your study last night.
Yeah.
He's like, it's not.
So basically she says, I left because I thought I'd be taking advantage of you because you were so drunk and vulnerable.
Yeah, in your grief and vulnerability.
And she says, what if I told you that your attention was welcome? She touches his face and says she wanted more to happen. She kisses him. He kisses her. He pulls away and says he was being too rough. But she's like, it's okay, I'm into it. And he says, bet. And he says, good. And then they kiss some more. I said, and he's down bad. He's like, this is all too much too soon. So he decides he won't go all the way. They're still making out though until knock knock.
No, he takes her over, sweeps his arm to clear the desk.
Oh yeah, he breaks some stuff.
He throws her onto the desk. And they're like getting hot and heavy. He's like, I really want to do her, but we need more time. She's still my servant.
Yeah.
I love this part. He says, I don't want to have sex with her and then tell her to go scrub the floors.
That's a good point. That's a very good point.
But yeah, then we get a knock at the door.
Knock, knock. Dunreeve calls for him outside the door, and they break apart. They say it's like a bucket of cold water is poured on them. Dunreeve says they're looking for Jocelyn because the Duchess and her guests have arrived. And Quint says he can tell by Dunreeve's voice that he knows she's in there, and that's why he's knocking so politely. And he's like, guests? I didn't know there were guests.
Mm-hmm.
And he says that his mother has brought the Earl's daughter as well.
The Earl of Drayton and his daughter, the Lady Diana.
Lady Diana. Jocelyn is trying to go. She's like, all right, I gotta go. But he's like, I want you to stay. And she's like, no, I can't. And he says, okay, but I want to talk to you later about what we are. And she says, I am just a housekeeper. And you, the Duke. And we do not belong to the same world, and it can never be more than what we just shared. And he's not happy with that answer. So Jocelyn takes off. She meets up with Dunreeve, who definitely knows what was going on. She apologizes for being late. She says she'll go attend to the Duchess at once, but Dunreeve is like, nah, girl, we're going to have some tea in your room, and we're going to talk about this. So they go to her room, drinking tea, and he's like, how old are you? And she's like, well, my age doesn't matter. It doesn't mean I can't be a good housekeeper just because I'm so young. And he says, no, he's wondering why someone so young has ended up in such a position with a wealthy duke. And Dunreeve asks her, did you closet yourself alone with the master of the last household where you were employed? Implying that she is sleeping with her employers for money.
Yeah. Or, yeah, like sleeping with her, like, employers to like,
rise
gain
above her
status.
station.
Yeah. It's like, how dare you?
And I'm also like, damn, Dunreeve, she did you a favor by hiring that one guy. You're just like, I'm going to get you. She says no, and she didn't today. She was only there to go over the menu for Christmas. And Dunreeve's like, for an hour? She's like, it was an hour?
Yeah.
She's like, when they were there, it was just them, and time was irrelevant. It was irrelevant. So Dunreeve basically says, if you want to keep your job, then you need to leave the master alone. And if he senses anything more, he will tell the Duchess, which Jocelyn can't afford because she's sending money to her family. So she leaves, determined to stay away, even though she still wants him. Quint goes to greet his mother, and they do not have a close relationship. He says he was raised by nannies, and his dad was no better. And he says it had not been until Amelia had come into Quint's life, ironically enough, in a match made by their parents, that he had begun to understand what love truly was. But after Amelia died, his mother was on him to find a new wife.
And he's like, I'm grieving here. We find out that it's been 2 years since she died.
I wrote this down.
Yeah.
So, his mom says, you need to be looking your best, because he's looking like disheveled and needs a shave.
No, he's wearing like country tweeds, and she's like, why are you wearing that? And he's like, I like it.
So he's like, you need to be looking your best for Lady Diana. And he's like, what do Lady Diana's marital prospects have to do with what I wear or whether I cut my hair, mother? And he knows she's trying to set them up.
Mm-hmm.
She says he must marry, or another cousin could take the position of Duke, because it's been 2 years. And he said, you needn't remind me how much time has passed since my wife and child died. Mm-hmm. And she goes, apparently I must. The proper period of mourning is 6 months, a year at most. And yet here you remain, buried in the north for 2 whole years, just as surely as if you lay down in her grave alongside her.
Like,
dang!
Lady?
She ruthless. So he's like, I don't want to think about any of this anymore. He just wants Jocelyn. Mm-hmm. But he knows now the issue of their stations isn't the only obstacle. Now it's Lady Diana and her father, Lord Drayton. He tells his mom that, Mom, you should go rest after such a long trip. And she's like, yeah, you're right. I'll talk to you later. So she goes to nap.
Then he catches Jocelyn and takes her to
what's a drawing room.
It's called a salon.
Which I looked it up. It says like a drawing room.
Yeah. So he takes her into the salon. He's like, I've been thinking of you. All I want is you. So they do some sensual touching. Please let me kiss you again.
Well, he says, she tells him, she's like, she remembers Dunreeve's warning, and she does tell him about it, mm-hmm. That she can't stay. She goes to leave, but he pleads with her to stay, and she tells him about Dunreeve and how they can't, but he seduces her by touching her arms and caressing her lips. Mm. And he says, ask for me to kiss you, because I won't until you ask me. And she does, and they make out. She says she has to go, and he says to come to his chamber tonight.
Yeah.
And she says they can't. What if they're caught? And he smooches her again, so much says she can no longer object. He says he wants more time with her uninterrupted, but as much as she wants to, she can't. Pulls away thinking about how much she needs this job, with tears in her eyes. He pleads with her, but she leaves knowing, quote, the Duke of Sedgwick was not for her, and there was no better confirmation of that than when she passed by Mr. Dunreeve in the servants' hall, his gaze calculating and shimmering with new suspicion. So Jocelyn takes to hosting. She actually doesn't talk to the Duke for 3 days, and she's just taking care of the guests, including Lady Diana. even though she feels a hot jealousy building up in her. She knows she's trying to marry the Duke. She says she hated the constant reminder that she was the kind of woman a Duke kissed secretly behind closed doors, but Lady Diana was the kind of woman a Duke would marry. And it seems to her that the Duke has accepted Jocelyn's rejection because he hasn't talked to her in 3 days, and he hasn't propositioned her again. But at the end of the day, she returns to her chamber, and in the shadows, she sees him. He tells her she doesn't need to fear for her job. And she's like, but Mr. Dunreeve, he says, is also in my employ. And he says, I understand your trepidation where your character is concerned, but please know you may be my housekeeper until you choose otherwise. She says he must go. He asks her if she wants him to go. He's looking at her with yearning eyes, and she says they cannot because it would be foolish. He asks her why, and she tells him because she's a servant and he's a duke. And as a duke, he has the liberty, but she cannot afford to. And he says, I don't think I ever despised the shackles my title places upon me, at least not truly, not until now. She asks what he wants with her, and he says he wants to court her. She says, you can't court your maid. You'll have to court someone like Lady Diana. And he says he doesn't want her. He only wants Jocelyn. She asks him to say no more, but he continues, do you not see? I am nothing but raw, aching need, and the fault is yours. I spend all day hoping for a fleeting sight of you, for a shared glance. I go to sleep at night thinking of you, imagining your glorious black hair unbound, wondering if it's as soft and silken as I think it is. I didn't want this. I didn't ask for it. She says she didn't either. She only asked to be his housekeeper. But she wanted to hear him say this to confirm her feelings weren't the only ones. He starts to confess that he may be in love.
She's like,
She stops him with a kiss. She couldn't bear to hear it if they were only to be together in this one moment. She had fallen in love with the Duke. She said if that's all they could have is this moment, so be it. So she starts kissing and stripping him down, even the gloves, kissing the scars of his hands that tried so hard to save his wife and child. She asks him to undress her, and he does. Sorta. Because remember, there's a shit ton of layers.
Yeah, back then.
So this is it gets a while before she's completely naked. He asks her to sit on the bed. She's like, why? And he says, because you're always tending to me, but now it's my turn to tend to you. So he takes off her shoes and gives her a really nice foot massage.
Yeah. It's so nice.
So he continues stripping her down because we're not done yet. And so he gets her naked enough where he can give her oral.
There it is.
Yeah. He asks if she's a virgin, to which she says no, but it's been a long time ago. And he says he doesn't care about that. He just doesn't want to hurt her. So they get it on.
Yeah.
And she says at this moment, she no longer feels like a housekeeper, but a goddess rising from the ashes.
And his dick is huge.
Yeah.
Of course.
Of course.
Because it has to be.
It has to be. Yeah, so they finish.
Mm-hmm.
And they snuggle up to each other, but she realizes she never took all his clothes off. And she wants to see every inch of him, every scar. So she rolls over and asks, and he hesitantly agrees, and she undoes his shirt. She ends up feeling him up. And they start making out again.
Mm-hmm.
Round 2.
Quint is like, again? And so they do it.
I think it's funny because, she, undresses him fully, and then she, tries to give him, a hand job.
Yeah.
Quint is like, "Aw, she's so inexperienced.
She doesn't know what she's doing.
But that just means I get to teach her." So he's like helping her,
Yeah.
and like showing her
I forgot
like,
about
what
that.
to do. I thought that was funny.
So he's
But
like,
yeah.
but then he's like, after that, he's like, oh God, I'm gonna finish.
Yeah,
and
so like
I don't want to do that unless I'm inside her.
Yeah.
So they start doing it again.
Oh, so he's trying to get her pregnant.
That's what I have down. I was like, hell, she's gonna get pregnant. And then she like, at the end, she like cries out kind of loud.
Yeah.
And he's like, oh, like everyone's gonna hear us, but that's okay because I want to yell it to the heavens that this woman is mine.
Yeah. He said he was too far gone to care if anyone overheard. Let the whole damn household come down upon them. He would declare himself to all the servants, to everyone who cared to listen, because this woman, Jocelyn York, was meant to be his. The next day, it's Christmas Eve!
Yay!
And Quint has been up all night making a plan to make sure Jocelyn is, like, safe in her position and everything. And
Like no scandal.
no
comes.
scandal comes to her. But his mother finds him in the hall and says they must talk in private, saying she's heard a egregious accusation this morning. And she goes on to say, the very scandalous nature which I can scarcely fathom. It is without a doubt the most dreadful, egregious, unbelievable, preposterous outrage I have ever, in all my years on this earth, been forced to confront. It says, but he maintained his sang-froid just the same. I do believe you said egregious twice, Mother. And his mom's about to have an aneurysm. She tells him that Lady Diana is so upset about this and she needs answering to. And he thinks she's going to swoon. But says, Lady Diana's maid came to her regarding the nature of his relationship with the housekeeper.
That someone saw him leaving her bedroom that morning.
Mm-hmm.
So
His mom begs him to say it's not true, but instead he says he never wanted to marry Diana anyway. The mom goes, so it's true. And Quint says he will not answer such a question, but he plans on marrying Jocelyn, the woman he loves.
so she's like, so it is true.
She says he can't love her. She's his inferior. And he says, quote, on the contrary, I rather think Mrs. York is my superior in every way. That she will make a fine Duchess. Mom is straight up about to pass out. And she says, but Diana is the perfect match for you and comes from a good family. And he says, how nice for her. I'm still not marrying the chit.
Well, then we find out that the reason that his mom wanted him to marry Lady Diana was because that his mom was in love with her dad, and she was like, he won't marry me unless his daughter is married. But we came here because there was some scandal in London with her.
And all her prospects
all
dried
her
up.
romantic prospects dried up.
And she says this is a really terrible part. She says, she sent Miss York to make the household presentable, and so that Lady Diana wouldn't run away from the condition of the home.
Yeah. I love there's a quote that says, few women will have you with your terrible scars, duke or no, and no gentleman will have Lady Diana given the gossip.
Yeah. So
It's just like, you're awful. That's your son.
yeah. So he's like, wow, I can't believe my own mother said that about my scars. And he's like, leave. And she's like, but it's Christmas Eve. And he's like, the trains are still running, girl. I want you out of here.
Also, I really want to know what scandal Lady Diana was involved with.
Oh, it didn't say.
It doesn't
say.
But I really want to know.
Maybe it's in the next one. I don't know. He finds So after that, he finds Jocelyn tidying up some Christmas greenery, and she acts like that night didn't happen. Just calling him my lord and everything. And she says she's about to start the table setting for everyone, but he says that won't be necessary because they're all leaving. And then he just kisses her. And she's like, but they can't because people will see. And he says, yeah, I can because you've been sacked. And she's like, please don't fire me. I can't afford to lose this job. But then he says, it'll be fine. You can just move them in here.
You're not going to be my housekeeper.
And you won't have to be a housekeeper ever again.
You're going to be my wife.
Yeah, but she thinks he's doing this to keep her as a mistress. And he's like, why would you think that? Of course you think that. And he pulls her down the hall underneath a kissing bough and proposes. He wants her to be his wife, to be the Duchess. And she says she loves him, but she's not Duchess material and doesn't belong. And he says, yes, you do. You belong with me. And she says, yes. And then they kiss beneath the kissing bough as snow began to fall anew. And for the first time since Jocelyn had been sent away all those years ago, she knew she had finally found her true home, right here in the arms of the man she loved. But that's not all. We have an epilogue.
10 years later.
10 years later. The manor is just decked out in all Christmas stuff. And they've been doing that every year for 10 years. And they have children. 9-year-old Nell, Clara, who is 7, Edward, who is 4, and Robin, who is 2. And a very pregnant Jocelyn. So Jocelyn's family has moved in, and we find out Quint's mom did eventually apologize, but that's kind of it. They exchange gifts.
Oh, I love this. Like, the kids love him so much that
they're all fighting over who gives the first gift.
They're fighting over who gets to give him their present first. Yeah. And so they do it from, like, oldest to youngest. So from oldest to youngest, they give him an embroidered Christmas tree, a pressed flower, and half an eaten gingerbread cookie.
That part was so cute because he basically like, oh, that's so sweet, and he says something, and he's like, well, here, honey, just finish it.
Yeah. He's like, well, you might as well finish it then.
So after that, it's time for the adults to exchange gifts. So Quint comes up to Jocelyn and gives her this beautiful emerald that's supposed to like be close to her eyes.
It's like, it's not
but
as
it's
pretty as your
as
eyes.
pretty as your eyes.
It's close enough though.
And then she says she got him something too. Wink, wink.
But I'll give it to you later.
I'll give it to you later. And he's like, I can't wait to get it. So that's why they have 5 kids.
And then they kiss under the kissing bough. And that's it.
It's funny though, because when they go to kiss under the bough, her belly's
Oh.
Wow.
Yeah, so they were really down bad. They be having kids.
Oh yeah.
And I'm guessing Nell is from their first.
I mean, yeah, she's 9 years old, and it's been 10 years. So, yeah.
She got pregnant right away. Yeah. What did you think, Hayden? It was much calmer.
Yes, much calmer, and I was right about them getting married. Even though she's a lowborn.
A lowborn.
Mm-hmm.
A scullery maid.
The scandal. Yeah, felt very Bridgerton, but less smutty.
Yeah, Bridgerton's pretty smutty.
Bridgerton's porno, basically, compared to that.
I will say we glossed over pretty much that sex scene.
Right.
Yeah. Well, there was a lot of stuff going on. A lot of touching and
Well, that's okay. You don't have to go into detail.
I mean, we did last time.
Yeah, it literally doesn't really get spicy until that 8th chapter, like at the very end.
Yeah.
And wasn't there something that said that this book is very spicy?
So when I look, because we each picked our own book for December of Desire, and I was looking for Christmas themed books, and the lady did the description. I was like, oh, that sounds nice. And then she wrote at the bottom, caution, like very spicy.
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, oh. So I wouldn't say compared to last week's, it's not that kind of spicy.
I know, like, it's definitely not as bad. Like I said, it's like a slow burn, like, romance.
It's more of a romance.
I mean, I did enjoy reading it.
Oh, yeah, me too. I really liked it.
Really cozy and Christmassy.
Yeah.
All right. So
what did you read, Hayden?
I read The 5 People You Meet in Heaven. I'm halfway through it. Great read.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Want to tell us a little bit about it, or do you want to wait until you finish all of it?
Well, I can tell you part of it. So we follow this man named Eddie, who is in his 80s, and he works at this carnival on a pier where he's pretty much worked his whole life. But he dies pretty early into the book. A ride has gone awry, and there's large piece of machinery basically that falls. The people that were on the attraction get off safely, fortunately, and this little girl who he had just made this like little toy for is like standing there in front of him, and so he reaches out to try to push her out of the way as he's crushed. And then we meet his first person he meets in heaven, where he sort of wakes up at the pier and he feels good. He feels like a kid again, but he's still in his old man body, and he can't help but start to run around and put his arms out like he's flying and just feels amazing. And all of a sudden he sees this man who has blue skin. And we come to find out that this man, who actually had somewhat of a tragic life himself, was one of the carnival attractions when Eddie was a young boy. And he is there to teach Eddie something. And that thing is that everyone is connected. And that Eddie doesn't remember this man at all, but Eddie had a very profound effect on his life. Eddie was the reason that this man died, in fact. So Eddie, on his birthday as a young boy, was playing with a baseball in the alley. The ball went into the street, and he ran out to go get it. And this blue man was driving a car and happened to swerve out of the way. But you find out that his skin is blue because of the substance that he took to try to help his nerves. And his heart could not take the excitement. So he starts to get dizzy after swerving out of the way so he didn't hit and kill Eddie.
Mm-hmm.
And he ends up crashing and hitting his head. And so he gets out, he's just dizzy and his heart is pounding. Mm-hmm. And he sits down and dies. Oh. So Eddie, in fact, was the one that led to his death. And Eddie did not know it at all. And that is the first person Eddie meets in heaven.
Oh, God. See, now I'm just thinking about how many people I've come across who have died right after I've run across them.
But that's the lesson, is that, you may not even know that you have this impact on somebody's life. Eddie didn't know this man at all.
Oh, man.
But they were connected in such a powerful way.
That's crazy.
Yeah. So that is one of the 5 people that Eddie meets in heaven. I've read through the second person that he meets in heaven, and it talks about his time in the army. But yeah, very good book so far. I won't spoil anything else about it. That is just the beginning. But very, very good read. I couldn't help but get emotional in the very beginning when he died.
Oh, yeah.
It struck a chord for me, talking about his death and his life coming to an end. So yeah, that's what I read.
Awesome.
We went from smut to talking about sad stuff. Death. Which we'll be reading about next month.
Yay. Well, the rest of this month.
Yeah, the rest of this month. It is December.
All right, I can go into my little literary news that I have. So I have two things. The first thing was I wanted to answer your question from last week on who exactly like judges those literary awards and everything. So I told you last week that Percival Everett had won the fiction category at the National Book Awards. So literary award judges are typically a panel of established writers, critics, academics, and sometimes editors who are chosen based on their expertise in the specific genre of the award. And then they have like a rotating panel each year with different judges just to ensure like fairness and everything. Right. So looking into the National Book Awards, they have 5 different categories. So fiction, nonfiction, poetry, translated literature, and then young adult literature. And each category has a panel of 5 different judges that are basically like experts on that subject. Most of them are published authors, but there were also some judges who were like literary professors. You had a few like bookshop managers, publishers on the panel. So it's just a wide range of people in the literary field who judge that stuff and everything. But thanks for your question, because I didn't know either.
Yeah, no, I mean, I always like to, whenever I hear something about like an award or like a poll, I'm just thinking to myself, okay, who is behind all this?
Yeah. And like it said, like they have a rotating panel, so it's like different people each year.
Right.
And everything.
Okay.
So then the second thing, I just read this little article where there's this group called the Authors Against the Book Bans, and they've been speaking out about their concerns for this next year, 2025, and they're focusing on like the Project 2025 that like people have been like talking about,
right.
The Heritage Foundation thing, and how they fear this agenda is a pro-censorship and pro-book banning administration. They focus on primarily the censorship and banning of LGBTQ plus works, because there's a section at the very beginning of the Project 2025 in the foreword where I did look at it. I downloaded the PDF and it does say this. It says, pornography manifesting in the propagation of transgender ideology has no claim to First Amendment protection. The people who produce and distribute it should be imprisoned. Educators and public librarians who purvey it should be classified or should be classed as registered sex offenders. And that's in like quotes. So that's what the project, so that's what the Project 2025 says like in their foreword. So basically the Authors Against Book Bans are just worried that that means that all LGBTQ plus content is going to be regarded as pornography, and that a lot of those works are now going to get censored or banned because of the policy, because like, the publishers aren't going to want to get in trouble, if that actually like comes into effect and everything, the Project 2025.
To be like imprisoned.
Yeah, exactly. So basically just what they did was they sent a letter out to about like 90 publishing companies just outlining their worries and asking for a renewed commitment to the freedom to read, to our freedom to write, and to authors' physical and creative safety, along with the reassurance that publishing will do all it can to resist silencing authors' voices. So I just read that little thing.
Okay.
Which like the Project 2025 is like I said, from the Heritage Foundation. I don't know if Trump is like actually endorsing it or not.
Trump has said multiple times he doesn't endorse Project 2025.
Yeah.
But he has said that there may be some good points in it.
Yeah. I just know that it's like linked to him a little bit. So I'm just like, But still, that's what it says in that. It's a very conservative, like that whole thing about like, like pornography. It's under their whole little section against like, we need to, the American family is under attack. and everything.
Yeah.
So, which I did read a little bit of it, and honestly, it didn't make any sense. So I was just like, just the parts that I did read, I was just like, all right, you made your statement. Now, what are you actually going to do about it?
They must be talking about like the...
Like, it doesn't say anything about...
Yeah. They must just be talking about like the, I guess, typical nuclear family that everyone thinks about.
Man, wife.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Children.
But there was this one little section. It was like, oh, fatherlessness is the cause of like crime and like suicide and like all of this stuff. And then I'm just like, all right, well, are you actually going to do anything about it? And they just started talking about like, oh, I don't even know.
Are you going to force the men to stay?
I know. I was like, are you actually going to do anything about it? Like, okay, how can we combat fatherlessness and everything? But it just started talking about something else, like something about like marriage taxes and everything. And I'm just like, oh, yeah, that's great.
So I know this is irrelevant, but I actually read an article about, was it Japan?
I think so.
I think it was Japan.
If it's the article I'm thinking of, then yeah, I think so.
Yeah, so the guy, one of the leaders in Japan, he's trying to get like something passed where it will, they're trying to encourage the birth rate? Mm-hmm. They're trying to encourage birth rate in Japan because it's been declining.
Mm-hmm.
And he said,
I mean, here too.
Yeah, and he says basically like trying to make it so that younger Japanese women are having to get married before a certain age. And if they're not married before a certain age, the older people have to have like their tubes tied or uterus removed because they're like, if you're not married by this age, you're not going to get married. So if you want to get married to someone, they're trying to be like, so you can't date them forever.
Yeah.
If you're going to have to get married. If you want to get married and have kids, you need to do it by this age. Or else at this age, you're going to have to get your tubes tied or your uterus removed. Yeah. So it's not a very popular opinion.
Yeah.
Luckily, it doesn't seem like a lot of people are into that idea.
Yeah. I wonder why.
Yeah. I was like, that's terrifying. I think the age was 25, I think. It was like, you have to be married by 25. And you could get, I think it was like, get your tubes tied by like 32 or 35 or something like that. Like, still really young.
Oh, yeah. So I went back to this. So under the article where it talks about fatherlessness, it says some goals like eliminating marriage penalties in federal welfare programs and the tax code and installing work requirements for food stamps. And I was like, wait, does that actually, I was like, is that actually talking about like the same thing? Which I mean, it's just like, it's like government jargon and lingo, so like it's just worded very weirdly. So I don't know if it's like linking those points or something else. So, but just trying to read it, it just makes me think like, do you actually know what you're talking about? Like, do you actually have a point on this? But I digress.
Yeah.
Like I said, I didn't read a lot of it because why would I? It's almost 1,000 pages.
Yeah.
I'm just not going to get into that, but
yeah.
But anyways, that's all I have to say about that.
All right. You can find us on Instagram and TikTok at OneLitPod. We upload these episodes to YouTube and Spotify. And we would still love for anyone to send us a story for us to read. and react to. And you can send that to us at onelitpod@gmail.com. That's onelitpod@gmail.com. And yeah, just submit your stories to us. We'd love to read them. All right. So we know what chapters we're reading.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Well, it's a reminder. What Dreams May Come. Richard Matheson. Reading to page 104. That's where we're stopping. Memory Still Haunts. So read your chapters.
Read your chapters.
Bye.
Bye. We'll see you next week.